purpose is that we are here to love others, which just also happens to be another command by God. When responding to the Pharisees' question, Jesus gives the full correct answer, which is two parts. Jesus says the first and greatest is to love the Lord your God. And the second one is just like it. In Matthew 22, verse 39, he says, the second is just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And this comes from Leviticus 19:18, which says, do not seek revenge or bear grudge against any among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. For I am the Lord. So when we read the second and greatest commandment, which is just like the first, one of the first things which comes to mind is how we are to determine who is my neighbor. In fact, this is exactly the same question that an expert of the law, a Pharisee, who, by the way, may or may not be the same one who comes to Jesus with this question, asked Jesus in Luke 10:29. Seeking to justify himself, the Pharisee asked, who is my neighbor? Now we may ask the same question seeking clarity of who is my neighbor. And in fact, we may have come to view our neighbor as one who is living in the house next to us. Because that is what we have commonly come to associate when we hear the word neighbor. Oh, our neighbor is the one who lives either in the house next to the left, to the right, to across the street from us, across the way, and that's who we think of as our neighbor. But the word used for neighbor is plesion. Plesion, which means near or close by. And so when you are hearing the word and trying to figure out who is my neighbor, the answer is quite simple. It is the person who is near you or closest to you. In terms of who is next to you physically at that moment in time. The person who is right next to you. So for all intents and purposes this morning, Darlene, who is your neighbor? It's Freddie who's sitting behind you. Noel, who is your neighbor? It's Carol, even though she's 6 feet from you. That is your neighbor. In fact, this is one of the points Jesus is actually trying to make by answering the expert of the law with a parable about the Good Samaritan. Christ is pointing out that our neighbor is any person, regardless of their race, regardless of their political leanings, regardless of their religion, regardless if we live with them or we live next to them, or regardless if they're our family or if they are just someone that we happen to meet by chance. They are our neighbor. Our neighbor is anyone who is right next to you, and we are called to love them as we love ourselves. And God and Christ are both pretty clear on the matter that if we truly love our neighbor, then we love them in a manner worthy of treatment that we give ourselves. We must love them as we love ourselves, which just to be very clear is that we tend to love ourselves pretty well. We tend to do things for ourselves that we would typically not do for others. We would go out of our way to treat ourselves with better care and consideration than those who we come into contact with, or as the Greek word says, we tend to treat ourselves better than those who are close by or near us. In fact, the love for ourselves is so extremely intentional about it that we are very careful about what we buy, what we wear, who we are friends with, where we go, who we associate with. And all this is about making sure that we do our best to love ourselves in the best ways possible for us. And therefore we pay great attention to ourselves and our needs while ignoring the needs of others around us. But we are called to love others. And this is our purpose. That we love them as we have loved ourselves. That we're willing to go out of our way and do the things which would be good for us, we do for them. And we see this more so in the good parable of the Good Samaritan. When we see and we read the Good Samaritan, we see how loving our neighbor as ourselves is in action. How Jesus is teaching the expert of the law, who is my neighbor? Well, let me tell you who is your neighbor through this story. And we see that the first two men, the first two who passed by, a Pharisee and a Levite, are symbols of the love that we have for the self, which is they see the man beaten and lying on the side of the road and realize that it is not in their best interest to help the man, because it interferes with what they are trying to do for themselves. Therefore, they have prioritized the love of self over the love of the man beaten and left for dead. And then Jesus says, lo and behold, a Samaritan comes along, and he takes care of the man beaten by the robbers. And here Jesus is asking us to love our neighbors, to love others like the Samaritan loved the man beaten by the robbers. You see, the man was his neighbor. The man was the one who was near him, the one who was closest to him. And so he treated him as he would have loved himself. The Samaritan bandaged and dressed his wounds with oil and wine. He placed the man on his own donkey, brought him to the inn and took care of him. In Luke 10:25 through 37, that is where we find the parable of the Good Samaritan. You see, the Good Samaritan took care of the man as he would have taken care of himself if he had been the one injured in such a way. He loved his neighbor as himself, as we should. And so our purpose is to love others. We are to care for them as we would care for ourselves, and to love them like God has loved us. And for us as a community, as a church who are called to love, we need to love in this manner. We need not pass judgment because of who they are, how they are coming in, or why they are coming to this church. All that doesn't matter.